Brace yourself.
In the tomes of video game history, there are a few genres that have left a mark more permanent than fighting games. From the rise of arcades to the boom of home consoles to the limitless reach of online play, fighting games have gone through plenty of golden ages, capped off with an enthusiastic community of gamers who've driven the genre to nearly untouchable heights. But with all of that support, it's a genre that's been admittedly difficult for me to explore. Fighting games are naturally rooted in competition, and I'm not a competitive person, believe it or not. I never saw the genre like its supporters did, and until 2018, I never thought I would. But then my anime nerd side took control and I gave Dragon Ball FighterZ a chance. I put the money down on an arcade fight stick, grabbed a PS4 copy of the game, and jettisoned myself into a genre that I had overlooked for decades. As I struggled to improve my skills and associate myself with the new control scheme, I began to see beyond the veil. Dragon Ball FighterZ hooked me. It made me enjoy fighting games to a level I had never experienced before. And before I knew it, this genre didn't feel like an alien world anymore. And I think I know why. Dragon Ball FighterZ strikes a careful balance between accessibility and depth, keeping its doors open for new players, but cultivating a sense of complexity that any great fighting game should. While it doesn't innovate or revolutionize its genre, Dragon Ball FighterZ is still a breakthrough. A prime example of conscientious design that welcomes newcomers and tests veterans. It hits the bullseye dead on. As someone who is still learning when it comes to fighting games, I gotta say that Dragon Ball FighterZ use of auto combos is a great way to associate players with the flow of combat. It helped me understand the game's fast pace, introduced me to the arena's verticality, and gave me a general idea of what to expect from the gameplay. Button mashing might seem counterintuitive, especially for new players, but on the contrary, auto combos are a cool way for a player to enter into a fighting game gently and carefully. As simple and straightforward as auto combos are, they establish a baseline for a player, especially newcomers like myself. They let the player learn about the game space and gauge the environment's elements like speed and navigation, sometimes without the player even noticing it at all. It's that inherent to FighterZ interface. A low barrier of entry is a very good thing for a game to have. It makes games accessible to new players without overloading them with mechanics and systems, giving the game an aura of invitation instead of intimidation. These low barriers of entry coincide with the game concept known as the skill floor, the minimum amount of skill needed to make gameplay enjoyable or effective. By relying on so few button presses to initiate them, auto combos keep the skill floor very low, making the game accessible and keeping the door open for newcomers to enjoy. That's exactly how I felt when I began playing Dragon Ball FighterZ with a fight stick for the first time. I was able to settle into the game's pacing and understood what kinds of moves were effective for particular situations. Yes, there are growing pains getting started, but compared to the other fighting games I played, and ultimately rejected, Dragon Ball FighterZ never scared me off. There wasn't much needed to get started and enjoy the game, and despite my inexperience, FighterZ kept things exciting and diverse. There was a ton of fun, even at the basic level. But you can't rely on auto combos forever. Eventually you'll come across a foe that uses moves that can easily break through that attack chain or can weave around them to catch you off guard. FighterZ makes it clear that auto combos aren't going to carry you past a certain point, especially online. Between its in-depth tutorial, challenging arcade mode, and extensive story mode, the game expects the player to tinker with a character's movesets until reliance on auto combos erodes away. Expanding your combos takes practice, and it's something that I'm admittedly still spending time refining. But steadily, I was able to break free of relying on auto combos as my sole method of improvement. The game demanded more from me, and my only option to progress further was to stand and deliver. Evolving skill beyond auto combos pushes the player further and further away from the skill floor and further upwards toward the skill ceiling, the maximum amount of skill required to enjoy a game. While the skill floor should be low to encourage accessibility and welcome new players, the skill ceiling should be high to keep experienced players from finding every trick available. If the skill ceiling is too low, gameplay can become homogenized and players can get bored from performing the same techniques over and over to win. An ideal skill ceiling should be high enough that players can demonstrate their technique in practice without the entire game becoming boring and samey. There should always be a new outlet, a new path to take that can prove effective in play. As a player approaches the skill ceiling, there should be a divergence of techniques where multiple directions can be taken. Players are then given the opportunity to grow in various ways. High skill ceilings are built for long-term enjoyment, letting players continue to develop their skills instead of reaching the singularity where everything becomes easy and boring. Speaking as someone who initially feared fighting games, I think that the genre in general has done a very good job at implementing its skill ceiling. This is pretty apparent, especially in the competitive circuit. High skill players encourage each other to improve via competition. What better incentive to improve at playing a competitive game than to eventually duke it out against a longtime rival? Competition is scary, I know this all too well, but it expands the boundaries for the player. It's easy to see when there are so many YouTube videos of people crafting combos and attack chains, finding ways to counter a buff and changing their lineup to accommodate techniques that might turn out less effective in a patch or update. But there's something else at work in the skill room with Dragon Ball FighterZ. There's a skill floor and a skill ceiling, and all of the space in between, with the ultimate goal being for players to ascend upward, developing their skills and exploring the increasingly complex elements of a game. But FighterZ makes this ascent cohesive and engaging in a way that's not inherent to the game itself, but its genre. Dragon Ball FighterZ as a fighting game has an advantageous design to its skill room, and it comes from a totally visible place: the culture. Let me explain. Early into my FighterZ stint, I played some matches with my friend Kurai. Since he was a veteran in the realm of fighting games, he kicked my ass, no prisoners. I was definitely frustrated after being beaten so bad, but he sent me a link to Maximilian Dood's video on extending air combos in Dragon Ball FighterZ. It's a great video that I took to heart quickly, so I began trying out air combos in the training modes, and steadily, I began to get it. Being able to keep combos going wasn't impossible to me anymore. After that video, I started looking at other recommended videos on FighterZ and discovered plenty of techniques and philosophies to improve my skills. Soon, I became completely invested in FighterZ. It was exciting to me when new characters were announced. I could see the potential of adding a DLC character to my team and what could be done to get good with them. I saw the light. Dragon Ball FighterZ had me. After a considerable amount of time practicing, I took my skills to Anime St. Louis, an anime convention in my hometown. In the game room, the convention set up arcade mock-ups with FighterZ installed, and I was ready to see if I could hold my own against local players. To my total surprise, I held my own. I did get pulverized several times, but a majority of the games were extremely close, whether I won or lost. For the first time, I felt like fighting game proficiency was in reach. I didn't expect to win any matches, none whatsoever, yet I could see my practice bearing fruit at that convention. It hit me. Fighting games were fun to me. What I discovered during my early months of Dragon Ball FighterZ was that there was an entire culture that was built to support newcomers. YouTubers who create tutorials to assist new players, fans who enthusiastically dig for new techniques to share online, and longtime players who are out to welcome the new blood into the fray. This culture is inherent to the fighting game genre, and as I steadily began breaking outside of FighterZ exclusively and tried other fighting games like BlazBlue Cross Tag Battle and even Street Fighter, it became apparent that this culture was always there. In fact, it's been around since the earliest years of fighting game cabinets and arcades. There is a community that assists younger crowds and encourages them to get better with practice. Only now, the community is linked with an online infrastructure, uniting a culture across the entire world. It's inescapable. So, what does this have to do with Dragon Ball FighterZ skill room? Well, the fighting game culture is united with the skill room itself. The skill floor is low and the skill ceiling is high, but in between them is a supportive updraft whose catalyst is the culture itself. Fighting games have this unique element where their community is pushing newcomers upward, letting them ascend the skill room quicker than in other genres, where competition isn't as big a component and learning new techniques isn't as communicative. Via the online and offline communities, fighting games are easy to get involved in, now more than ever. Take it from a guy who wrote off fighting games for decades. The ascent toward proficiency isn't nearly as arduous as it might seem. even with my improvements, I'm not gonna conquer Evo. My experience still runs between beginner and intermediate. I'll say this much though, Dragon Ball FighterZ is not an isolated incident. As someone who's been outside looking in for so long, I can see that the world of fighting games has been growing stronger and more supportive than ever before. My journey climbing Dragon Ball FighterZ skill room had its share of rough spots, frustrating missteps that set me back a while. But the journey was, and still is, rewarding. It opened my eyes to the connection between fighting game design and the culture that energizes it. It showed me that keeping games accessible makes that first step less intimidating, but pushing a skill ceiling higher will dimensionalize both competitive and casual play to let new ideas flourish. Dragon Ball FighterZ isn't the first game to master this structure, nor will it be the last. What I can say though, is that FighterZ set a strong precedent for me, showing the natural unity between a game's accessibility, complexity, and cultural footprint. With these three elements honed to a point, it's no wonder why Dragon Ball FighterZ is such a success, and I can say without a moment of hesitation that I'll be sinking dozens more hours in by the year's end. See you online.